Hon kommer att vara på engelska efter mig. Jag heter Lars Linder och är förbundssekreterare i Socialdemokratiska Parti och Solidaritet. Jag ska bara hälsa välkomna och lämna över ord och ton så fort som möjligt till Cyprus Conflict och Peter Weiderud som ska prata om religionens roll i konflikter och som konfliktlösare snarare än konfliktskapare, skulle man kunna säga. Vi har i Socialdemokratiska Parti och Solidaritet engagerat oss i religionens möjligheter i ett flertal konflikter, och bland annat har vi ett projekt i Cypern där ju religionen har varit ett skäl i argumentationen för en konflikt som har pågått under väldigt många år, men där vi istället försöker hitta vägar där religionen kan vara en lösning på detta. Jag kan inte avstå från att lägga till att vi som organisation faktiskt också har gått ifrån att vara en organisation för kristna socialdemokrater till en organisation för socialdemokrater oaktat vilken tro du har, där man har rätten att få ta med sig sin tro i sitt politiska arbete, där vi arbetar religionsövergripande och där vi tror att samverkan och dialog är lösningen på problemen snarare än motsatsen. Det finns det ju andra som tycker. Nu har jag pratat alldeles för länge. Jag ska bara presentera våra panelister. Cyprus Conflict som jobbar som projektledare i vårt projekt på Cypern. Hon är cypriot. Tillhör den armeniska minoriteten, kristna på den grekcypriotiska sidan, som i och för sig tror jag man kan säga i hög utsträckning ändå har väldigt mycket kulturella band till den turkcypriotiska sidan när man tittar på historia. Och har därmed egna erfarenheter av konflikt utifrån ett ytterligare, i någon slags mening, dubbelt minoritetsperspektiv. Hon har jobbat på Middle East Council of Churches med MR-frågor ett antal år. Hon har jobbat i Kyrkornas världsråd med ett ansvar för Mellanöstern och nedrustningsfrågor och har lång erfarenhet av religion som en del i konflikter och hur religion kan lösa konflikter. Peter Weiderud är vår förbundsordförande. Han har också många års erfarenhet av att arbeta med religion och politik. Han har jobbat i Svenska kyrkan som utrikeschef. Han har jobbat med utrikespolitiska frågor i Kyrkornas världsråd. Han har varit politiskt sakkunnig i regeringskansliet när vi hade klokare regeringar. Och är alltså nu förbundsordförande i Socialdemokratiska Parti och Solidaritet. So, welcome. This was the Swedish introduction, and now I leave the floor to first Peter Weiderud. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lars. We will do this in English, not just for the need of practice English, but also because this is the language Salve and I have in common, and it's important that we understand each other when we are discussing this, but also that we have announced this in English, and there might be also people who would like to see this on the web later that look forward to that. Cyprus is at the moment, or since yesterday, the president of the European Union. It's a European country. It's the most eastern of the European countries, also one of the most southern, if not the most southern. Yeah, Greece is probably part of Greece, at least more southern, but very southeast located in Europe. But also historically with one leg in the Middle East region and one leg in the European region. It's also the only European Union country where Christians and Muslims have lived together for a long, long time, and most of the time in harmony and close cooperation. Cyprus has a very complex and long history that of course affects it's a situation which we're experiencing now with the long conflict that has been going on the island. But to start from 1570, when the Ottoman came and took over the ruling of Cyprus from the Venetians, and that was a significant change religiously from a Catholic dominating governance into a Muslim dominating governance, but also with a lot of tolerance and cooperation also to the majority, which was and still is Christian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. Some 100 years later, Great Britain, took over Cyprus as a colony, which was a period of which in a way invested in the conflict that we are seeing today, where we saw a lot of divide and rule policy, which was of course the way of governing in many colonies, not only by the British, but not least by the British. Cyprus gained independence in 1960 and started out with a very complicated constitution which should balance the two big communities, the Christian and the Muslim community, the Greek Orthodox, the Greek Cypriot and the Turkish Cypriot. But a very complex constitution that failed only after 3 years. And since 1963 there has been a clear conflict in Cyprus, and there has been a presence from the United Nations since 1963. And the conflict escalated in 1974 with an attempted coup from extreme right-wing Greek Cypriots with the intention to unite Cyprus with the Greek junta in Athens, which was the pretext used from Turkey to come to rescue as they say, the Turkish Cypriots, but where they invaded the country, and there has been an invasion since then. It stayed on since 1974, where the country was divided, and also religion was divided. Cyprus conflict is not a religious conflict. It's a political conflict. It's a conflict about land, governance, and power, like most conflicts. Nevertheless, religion is divided in Cyprus. Religious rights are one of the most obvious victims in the Cyprus conflict. Religious peoples on both sides have more intense feeling about violence in the past compared to secular people. They are less positive to opening of borders compared to secular people, and they have fewer encounters with people from the other side, and hence have more resistant to reconciliation. So religious people are more negative to what we normally would consider peace than secular people in Cyprus, and that is valid on both sides. Religion also, of course, plays a role in Cyprus politics and in the Cyprus conflict. And the question is, what role? Cyprus, as I said, is the only country in the European Union where Christians and Muslims have lived together for centuries, and which what can be described as coexistence, cooperation, and even harmony. But for the last half century, the experience has been quite the opposite. And that also, of course, means that the unique role that Cyprus could have as a bridge between the Christian Europe and the more Muslim-dominated Middle East, it's not able to play, because it's not able to come to terms with itself. I started to work with this, and later Salpi joined in this work. I started in 2009, when I, together with the Swedish ambassador to Cyprus, started to connect more closely with the two main religious leaders, the Archbishop of the Church of Cyprus, His Beatitude Chrysostomos II, and also the Director for the Office of Religious Affairs, so-called the Mufti, Dr. Talib Atalay. And when we started this work, these two leaders had only met twice since 1963. Not as persons, because there have been different persons, of course, since 1963, but the two functions only met twice. One was already in the 60s, a meeting facilitated by the United States, which took place in the US, and one just after the Green Line was opened in 2003, but a meeting that also, because of lack of facilitation, ended up in a crisis, in a clash. And this is, of course, from my understanding, very serious. Religion and religious ethics can indeed make an important contribution even to the most complicated political processes. Process of healing, forgiveness, reconciliation, these processes that made it possible for South Africa to raise and see a future after the terrible memories of apartheid, would never have succeeded without the experience, the tools and mechanisms which were offered to the political structures by the religious leaders, in particular, of course, by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And during the years that I worked for the World Council of Churches as the Director for International Affairs, I saw a clear difference, for example, in West Africa, between those countries who had developed inter-religious council, where there was an established dialogue between Christians and Muslims, and those where there was no such instruments. West Africa is a region with very strong mix of Christians and Muslims, and from time to time we can read about clashes between representatives from these communities. A church or a mosque might be attacked, and that creates a risk for growing tension, actions of revenge. And in countries where there are no structures where Christian and Muslim leaders can meet and discuss, there is a risk that those voices that ask for revenge, that ask that instigate hatred, gets much stronger. But when you have a dialogue going on and they are able to meet, instead they are able to de-escalate the conflict. And the same was in the history of the World Council of Churches, where we have many examples where the churches have been able to play a different and constructive political role in the conflict. During the years I worked, for example, that was during the US-led invasion of Iraq, 2003, we were able in the World Council of Churches to bring all leaders, all of them, in the 344 member churches in all countries around the world, to criticize the war and to call it illegal, immoral and ill-advised. That of course did not stop the war, but also the churches in the United States and the United Kingdom who were, so to say, took the lead in the invasion, were able to criticize their own government. That sent a signal to the Muslim world that this was not a Christian war against Islam. This was a war taken for other reasons, and to which the Christian community did not agree. I come from a country that is often described as the most secular country in the world. In many European countries, people will argue that religion belongs to the private sphere, and that there should be a clear separation between church and state, and religion should have no role in issues like politics and economics. That's, of course, one way of describing secularism. And in the organization where I'm the president, the Religious Social Democrats, was formed when there was serious tension between church and state, or particularly between church and the Swedish labor movement a little over 80 years ago. And this made the Swedish labor movement was at that time inspired from Germany, an ideologically strict secular, and the church was resisting some of the changes that the labor movement and the political left was introducing and was fighting for in Sweden at that time. And this made many Christians belonging to the political left homeless. They were rejected both in the church and in the party. The church for being too left, and in the party for being too religious. And the Christian Social Democrats at that time, and the Religious Social Democrats, as we call ourselves today, we opened up to individuals of active faith communities. And in modern Sweden, we have become a space for people who wanted the inspiration of their faith to be translated into political actions for human rights, economic equality, etc. It's clear that religion can inspire and guide people in very different directions. We see that all around the world. Martin Luther King Jr., for example, he led the civil rights movement in the United States as a pastor, and with a strong reference to Bible and also to religion. But also the Ku Klux Klan did the same. They also claimed that they were acting on the side of God. So how can we separate a destructive influence from a constructive one? I struggled with these issues also some some years ago when I was working as director for the international work of Church of Sweden, Svenska kyrkans mission. When I met with Serbian refugees from Krajina in Croatia, who lived in refugee camp in Serbia, and who were asked by the international community to return to their villages, a common response was, "I would like to return, but only if the priests return." This need for identity, connection, was extremely important for them to feel safe and secure. But in the meantime, the donor community was investing in everything else but that, in electricity, in roads, bridges, solid infrastructure. Few donors were interested in rebuilding churches or mosques or support the return of clergy. And even if you could argue that investing in securing people's identity, building trust, and guide people towards reconciliation would have been the best possible and most cost-efficient investment. I told the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA, at that time, who has a clear secular mandate, that I understood them. It is difficult for SIDA to distinguish between a good priest who is guiding the community to reconciliation dialogue and a bad priest who will nurture nationalism. But I also told them that in this case, Church of Sweden have the instrument to make that distinction. We know how to see the difference. Can we find a way to work together so we don't miss this opportunity? And to understand the role of religion in relation to politics, it can be helpful to clarify what religion actually is. For a person of faith, of course, religion is one totality, cannot be separated. But if we look at it from a political perspective, it is helpful to describe religion as four very different expressions. First of all, religion is spiritual experience. And that experience is very similar, not only between Christian Orthodox, Protestant, and Catholic believers. That is actually very much the same in all world religions. The individual's relation to God is at the same time very private and not really an area for political interaction. But secondly, religion is also theology. Teaching about God has in the past been an area where there have been serious disagreements between religions. But this is an area where a lot of progress has been made. And this is also an area which is private in the sense that the state should not interfere, but leave this area for religious institutions, scholars, etc. to work with. At the same time, it should be recognized that theology can very much inspire to political actions, like the liberation theology in Latin America, feminist theology in Europe, and the teaching of Mahatma Gandhi, for example. Thirdly, religion is ethics. And this is also a field where there is a lot of common between religions, more bringing them together than separating them. But this is also at the same time a clear political area. It's a highly political field which politicians cannot ignore. Whether they are religious or not, politicians cannot disregard from the ethical footprints of religion in society. And fourthly, religion is bearer of culture, expression of identity. And this is the area where we can see the strong differences both within and between religions in today's world. And this is an area which makes religion actually into high politics, extremely political, and where there need to be a political approach. When religion and religious leaders are looking at their own tradition and identity as the only true expression of faith, separating people from true believers and infidels, it can of course fuel the conflict. And unfortunately, we find this misuse of religion in all traditions, and growingly so. And what we are experiencing, I would say, is not a clash between religions, as sometimes been expressed, for example, by the American political scientist Samuel Huntington, but rather a clash within religion. Some are dividing the world between us and them, true believers and infidels. Others are using their own tradition as a departure point, to reach out to others in dialogue and in cooperation. And the Swedish initiative on the religious track in the Cyprus peace process, as I said, was not instigated because Cyprus conflict is a religious one, but rather to see how can we work and make the religious leaders take responsibility for this constructive role rather than the ignorant role or destructive role that we have seen in the past. And going to Cyprus, where it is at the moment, I feel we are at the point, and Cyprus will of course now go into describing what we actually have achieved with the work that has been going on, that these kind of track 2 initiatives, working with others than only the political leaders, is probably going to be much more important in the future. The dialogue, which has been supported by the United Nations and the negotiation that has been going on more or less since 1963, has not been able to deliver, and it's at the moment at a very, very critical and difficult point. There was a great opportunity lost in 2004 when Cyprus joined the European Union, and also there was a referendum on the so-called Annan Plan. There was another opportunity lost a little over a year ago when there was a situation where there were 2 leaders who were both actually interested in finding a solution, to have the presidential leaders from both sides with the same agenda for a solution. Has not been the case for a long time, if ever, in the Cyprus conflict. But with that, I leave to Salpi to share with you the actual result and work that we have been doing. Thank you.
I will simply follow the talk and not start a new one. As Peter said, the Annan Plan was a time when there was a lot of investment by the international community to find a way that the people, both Turkish and Greek Cypriots as well as minorities, could find a solution together. And what we saw in the Annan Plan was a clear lack of respect of the symbols that divided also the people. So while it was a very elaborated and very solid document of legality and how they could share, but when it came to the symbols that would touch people's hearts, the soft areas of reconciliation, the churches that that are in decrepit place, the mosques and the cemeteries, they were seen as, once there's a solution, then we will come to deal with them, instead of being seen as a process. But people's hearts, maybe they would be more comfortable to make those compromises with regards to security, property, etc., if there were certain areas that were also, they found a way to soften their hearts. There are 557 churches in the northern part of the island, where it's right now under Turkish military rule or Turkish rule, that are not in use. Some of them are used like museums, some are in youth centers, some are used as completely left stables or in a very bad. These are images that touch people's hearts in a very negative way. We see in the south mosques that are in very good shape, but some mosques that are just not in use. In the same way, not really taken care of, cemeteries that nobody visits, and some that are only partially used. So the violations that we're looking at right now are the right to worship, which is on both sides of the island, which is not the case, or partial use. And the other one is the freedom of movement. The island has been divided, and the ceasefire line where things stopped has started being acted as a de facto border, while it's basically not a border, but it acts that way. So in order to cross, which is now possible, where before it wasn't, you have to show a passport, which is not an international border, but you have to do that and pass. And there's a control of military if you can cross or not cross, by the Turkish Cypriots or the Turkish military to be able to do that. And any time you can close up. And this is not the final status, it's just within the conflict where it is. The fact that there are Turkish settlers that have been brought to Cyprus after the occupation under international legality are considered illegal, and hence they're not able to cross to the Republic of Cyprus, which is the southern part. It happens that the Mufti of the island is someone who came to Cyprus and considered a settler. He was 5 years old when he came, therefore he cannot cross to the south. So even though he's the Grand Mufti of Cyprus, according to a constitution in 1960, under the current situation, he is only a religious director of, appointed by the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which the South, the Republic of Cyprus, doesn't recognize. So in a way, it sounds right, in a way, in order to be able to dialogue, we have to cross those international legal boundaries. We have to start to go beyond in order to be able to live together. There have been 1+2 high-level meetings that the Swedish supported initiative, the religious track of the Cyprus peace process is branded in Cyprus as a Swedish process. So the Swedish, so there is a very strong branding to Sweden, while it is the religious social democrats that are leading the way. In a way, the religious social democrats are doing a favor to Sweden, because the Cypriots, both sides, see this as a Swedish-led process. So it's Sweden that gets the branding, Sweden that gets the credit, ultimately, unless it all fails, and then Sweden will not get it. And I hope that that won't be the case. But the first one was between the previous Mufti, not the current one, with the Archbishop, and he was married to a Turkish Cypriot. Therefore, according to the Republic of Cyprus law, he was able to cross to the south. So the meeting was confidential. It took place at the residence of the Swedish ambassador. It's very private. It was the ambassador, Peter Bejdrud, and the two leaders only. And it was the first time to kind of get them together. It happened that right after that, elections happened in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. The leader that was in very good terms with the Greek Cypriot, and they were dialoguing, lost the elections. A more hardline leader was elected. Mufti changed, and there was a period where there was no Mufti. So the talks then took, or the facilitation had to take a very shadow line, maintaining the dialogue with the Greeks, with the church, the leader of the Church of Cyprus, and waiting to see what would happen in North. The two high-level meetings, the +2, as I said, that have taken place is with the current Mufti, the Grand Mufti, His Excellency Dr. Talib Atalay, as we recognize him, and the Archbishop. And due to the fact that he cannot cross, they've been taking place in the buffer zone. There's something called the no man's land in Cyprus, where it's UN protected area, where you would see maybe in talks that if you see the Lidra Palace Hotel, where the official talks take place, that's where one took place there, another one took place at the lunch meeting opposite, but all in the no man's land area. The fact that both leaders agreed to come and meet each other there is really a positive result. I mean, for the outside world, this may look like, what does it mean? But it's a huge deal for those leaders to come out of their seats and to meet in a buffer zone, because it also means acknowledging each other and not using the pseudo-state, the pseudo-leader, the pseudo-this, the illegal concept, but that I accept you no matter what legality you have, and you will have to find a way to talk. It was agreed that the talk, and until recently, it is still the meetings are off the record. They're not open to the public or to the media. The agenda has been developed, facilitated by the Swedish process, and it's something they both agreed. But it was also the kind of chemistry that needs to be developed, and that's not something you can organize or facilitate. That's something that the Holy Spirit can guide you to bring together. So, and you know, it was really funny because the UN were not expecting religious leaders to, they're soldiers. And suddenly, you've got cloaked up, all sorts of costumes to enter into the scene. And the place was dusty and we were trying to tidy it up. And it was not meant to be the space, but it became a very peaceful, quiet space where the two leaders, to our surprise, really went beyond what we were expecting. Even used words like, I see the image of God in you. And they found a way to connect. We have to also remember, of course, that what goes on in private doors is not sometimes what they would say and what they show in public. So those affect negatively the private talks, because they said very positive things privately, but then the next day in the media they may say something completely different for the public consumption. that of course, so our role is very much not only to facilitate, but also to mediate. There's a lot of this. And there's a lot of listening and hearing each side separately. So there's almost daily contact, if not more, with both sides separately, where they just talk. And you can see that the fact that there hasn't been this contact, and the first time that a country or a party that took the courage, and I really mean that, and I have to congratulate you for that, because it was a courage to take up and to bring these two leaders. There's been a lot of attempts for dialogue, but no one is there, no country, no party, no local, international, to bring the religious leaders together. And while they're political actors, especially the Church of Cyprus, what the leader of the Church of Cyprus says is a mark. There's an autocephalous church, there's a lot of influence. And you have to remember that the first president of the Republic of Cyprus, at a time when things were dividing up and the invasions, occupations, etc. happened, was also the head of the church. So the image Turkish Cypriots have of someone who comes in black cloaks and crosses is also very, very scary and negative. So it's also changing a lot of that. Another challenge we face in our talks is that while in the Greek Cypriot community in the south, you will see a very dominant role of the church or religion as such, positive, negative, depending on where you sit, but still very dominant. You will see a very extremely secular society among the Turkish Cypriots, where religion is seen as something outmoded, illiterate, and something that we should completely keep away from, not only politics, but public life in general. You don't see, so we have a very asymmetric situation to do dialogue. While this one and this one, and he makes decisions while he's a civil servant appointed by the states. So to try to, it's a challenge. But the individuals are able to go beyond it. And I honestly believe, and I hope I'm not naive in this, that these two leaders, there's an opportunity right now. And while the talks are stalling, and they will for the next 6 months because of the talks, because of the presidency, because of the way Turkey has responded to the Cyprus presidency of the European Union, because of the fact that the dialogue is not taking place. The UN is still shuttling and working back and forth. And as Peter mentioned, the fact that the track 2 diplomacy will be taken into account, I think it's extremely important to keep them engaged, to bring up the agenda where they do, especially at this time. And from a very confidential process, it has moved to a more public process. We've talked to the media is aware of what's going on. Whenever they've asked for it, we have. And the leaders have agreed that they will not go to the media unless there's something constructive to say. Both of them, last year, agreed that they would have a common project together. In a way, it was like a test case, where if this succeeds and if we can manage to do this, I think we can continue. It was almost like a bit anecdotal, but it was. And they both agreed, it was a proposal of the Church of Cyprus, let's focus on youth. And we welcomed it. We were not really prepared for it, but we did. They wanted to bring in another conflict, Israeli-Palestinian youth, in a way as a neighboring country, another conflict where it's not a religious conflict, but religion does play a role. And we brought together 40 youth, 10 Jewish, 10 Palestinian Christian Muslim, 10 Turkish Cypriot Muslim, and 10 Greek Cypriot community, which included 1 Armenian and 1 Maronite, which is a Catholic minority in Cyprus. And it was amazing, because when I was preparing for the talk here, I thought, what do I tell people in Sweden who have youth events at all times and everybody comes together? For us in Cyprus, this was an amazing, because it was the first time ever, and we're talking 2011, from 1960s, where youth from the faith-based communities ever came together. So the even fact that the leaders said that we give our blessings and it's under our auspices, the fact that these youth came together was in itself historic. I mean, it has not been heard of. There are a lot of peace, bicommunal, as we call them, events that are going on from the 90s onwards. In the 80s and beyond, it was not an accepted thing. We were involved in it, some of us were considered traitors, but from the 90s onwards, you do see a lot of that, and supported by the United Nations Development Fund, special project in Cyprus with a lot of funding from USAID. But those funding and what we've seen, and also I can still see we're working with them, has gone traditionally, and still does, to the traditional bi-communal groups that are almost anti-religion. So there are a lot of events going on now. You see music, concerts, and women's, etc. But nobody attempts to touch those kids who have a faith-based background, and those kids, while the others cross and go shopping and eat, etc., and don't even consider, what it is. Those kids had never crossed. So even the crossing process we felt with them, including the spiritual leaders that guided them, Orthodox and a priest and Muslim, the Orthodox kids had never crossed. So, he comes from a village in the north, so he had to go back to his own. So there was also the personal. We moved from the personal to the public of what it means for them that they have not seen each other. And suddenly, it's not anymore the enemy, but a human being. So while in other conflicts, this is the most normal thing, in Cyprus, this was not the case, especially when it comes to this specific group of people. Because we've got different groups, those who are not interested, those who are completely against. There's like a club almost of the peace groups, but they don't really open up. It's almost like a little ghetto of the same kind of people. We see each other at all times. And then there's religion that is kind of somewhere outside there. I saw from the comments the youth made themselves the thirst, and I don't mean to exaggerate this, but how much they really wish that this something could go on. And I feel we failed them because, we are constrained with budgets and fundings and umbrellas and all sorts of things that no matter how much it's the political sphere and it's Sweden is the umbrella and whatever, you still have the other constraints that come into it. And, there was no infrastructure, even though there's huge infrastructure in Cyprus around it, but to take those kids and to say, yes, we can continue. And the facilitators that work with us, professional young people, told us the energy that we managed to take that week will not last forever. So please bank on it and move it up. It's still good that, because of Facebook and internet, that we are keeping them together. We've had meetings where the young people made proposals to meet each other. They had an Eid celebration, things that used to happen in Cyprus, but it hasn't happened since 1960. So there has been little attempts, but right now the youth have committed that they would like to have an interfaith youth network of Cyprus, the Peace Network, which we really feel that we would like to give them that support. They were very moved by being in a church that was really, it is on the plan to be restored, but it was in a very bad state. And to see Jewish, Muslim, and Christian kids all come together in a space of worship, which is not together to pray together, to cry together, and to say that this is not something we accept, no matter who divides us and what it does. And they proposed a campaign where they would like to go together to both sides to renovate churches and mosques. The churches on this side, so they want to open up and invite young people, but again, we need to let them go and we need to provide them that space. They are being constrained by political decisions that are on one side or the other side, but the religious leaders have given them their blessings and they're there. Women, the mothers who came around their youth, suddenly came to me and said, we don't have a space to meet the other side, and we would like to do that. Is there a way that the Swedes, because it's the Swedes can also bring us together? And I said, yes, we could. But there are so many inspiring examples, and I'm very, very pleased that the Religious Social Democrats have decided to bring their board meeting to Cyprus, because it's not common. Cypriots don't know what Religious Social Democrats are. And I realize now that when we talk, we spend more time describing what Religious Social Democrats are than what they actually do, because they're really wanting to learn. Who are these people? Why are they interested in Cyprus? They don't realize there's also a personal agenda, but they've come to Cyprus and they're taking the time. So there are moments where, like in any dialogue, there are peaks and then lows. And in the peaks, we've managed on a concrete level to take away things like there was a fee that was put on a very important monument in the north that was imposed by the local mayor. And this was very, very hurtful to the Greek Cypriots, the Church of Cyprus, because it was a fee to a monastery. And through the dialogue, this is something that Grand Mufti was able to intervene and take away. This was a small step, but it made the Church of Cyprus feel more trusted to move forward. And they have continued to work on their agenda of both the issue of the right to worship, the crossing, and how they recognizing the political constraints they're working in, and the asymmetries. And only last week, when we had a meeting with the head of the Church of Cyprus, he's like, where is my friend? How is my friend, the Mufti? When are we going to meet again? Please, bring us together. So there is that kind of an atmosphere where we feel very encouraged. I would just like to add that another issue that happened that again sounds very common for anywhere else in the world, but it hasn't happened like that in Cyprus. During Easter, we had an experience with a mosque was burned. It could have been, there's a tradition in the Greek Orthodox Church where on the Holy Thursday, there's bonfires on Judas is burned, really. But in any case, so there could be that it was young people in there, maybe it was nothing political, it was maybe, not illegal, but it's immediately seen as what is this. So there I could see that because of the dialogue and what work we're doing with, the statement that the head of the Church of Cyprus made was very, very important, and also the statements that the Grand Mufti made. They'd known each other, so they were able to make statements where they say, we condemn this together and we can't do that. That kind of immediately, it could have really sparked out, it got it down. At the same time, we have the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on Religious Freedom and Belief visited Cyprus for the first time in his agenda, and he gave a report. Usually a human rights report is going to criticize one side against the other side, etc. And they don't usually, in the human rights world, there's the kind of that one side doesn't want to hear what the other side is going to say because it's going to be attacking the other side. And we managed to take the bishop, the priests, and the imam together, and we sat together and listened to the report together, received the report together. This was very much attacked in the media because suddenly we see an imam and priest sitting together listening to a human rights report about saying what each one does, and both of them got up and said, we both condemn this together. This hasn't happened like this before. So these are very, very small steps for the outside world, but huge steps for the small environment. And I really hope that it's important that a country like Sweden continues to facilitate such a process, because if it was an NGO or a local group, the two leaders would not be able to be pushed to come together. So that name in itself, a country that it's not a colonial power in Cyprus, doesn't have a history, it hasn't sold arms, or
not much.
At least I know. So it hasn't, it's clean, and it comes into the process. It's a bit like the Oslo process, where Sweden started that, and it was taken over by Norway, but it's a process that can lead to something else. And I really hope that Sweden can see that seed and continue. And the fact that the Social Democrats have taken that, and given that umbrella, is extremely important. I hope that it can continue, even if we may have setbacks. And I hope that throughout this year we can see more concrete steps, especially the next 6 months, in such a way that we can show to the world that while things are not proceeding the way they want, maybe on the track 1, but maybe the track 2, very much linked to the track 1, can bear fruits. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter and Salpi. We have got some minutes for questions, and while I listen to your very interesting contributions, I'm thinking about one aspect of this is that you're not talking about politics, you're talking about feelings coming from the heart. And to make 2 questions out of this, one to Peter. The Swedish policy for development policy has been is heading a direction where feelings getting less and less value, and it's only financial auditors that are counting. How can we change the development policy so that it brings people inside, and the ideas of making things that touches your heart, which you were talking about, Salpi, which I think was very, very interesting. And the other question to you, Salpi, is how do you do when you make people that for 40 years not have been talking about this, start talking about it. Probably you've told us, but I still wonder, how do you do to make people talk about real things that you feel in your heart? Perhaps some other comments as well.
No, you are right in this. What you're saying that in particular development policy at the moment is moving into what can be easily measured and described and accounted for out of a very narrow Swedish agenda. Swedish development policy is fantastic. The first proposition to the Swedish Parliament was actually written by Olof Palme exactly 50 years ago. Proposition number 100 is a classical one. For a long period of time, I mean, there of course policies have to change as the world is changing, but the ideas that was invested in 50 years ago were very much long-term, forward-looking, and working with political processes and also taking risks. And we are moving away from that. We have now a situation where auditing and accounting are eating more and more of the budgets, where the priorities are to what can be easily measured. There will be wells, there will be blankets, there will be, and we move from investing in preventing conflict rather than we get more and more into humanitarian aid in catastrophes. It's a very sad situation altogether. And of course, this is about understanding realities, working with local people on the ground that understand the situation, and being able also to invest in those areas that cannot easily be measured, but still, or where the result has to be measured in a much more long-term perspective. There are, it's also clear that the international community can also go very wrong. We have in Cyprus, we have a situation where USAID, the United States Development Agency, have invested a lot of money in trying to help the cultural heritage in Cyprus. They have renovated several cultural heritage. Hala Sultan Tekke, a fantastic mosque in Larnaca, was a ruin for many years. The Armenian church and monastery in the north, and several other. USAID has a policy never to rebuild places of worship, because that is a policy in the US Congress. You have to divide between church and state. So they don't do worship places, they do buildings. And this is of course not a problem in most countries where there is someone that takes over the responsibility when it's returned. But in Cyprus, there is a lack of that responsibility because the monuments are located on the wrong side of the Green Line, and there is no full respect how to take care of a mosque in the south, and there are definitely no full respect of how to take care of churches and monasteries in the north. So by having that kind of policy, they are actually not helping as much as they could. So of course the need for having development policies to better understand these deeper and most human dimensions of development drivers, it's extremely important.
Thank you.
One of the things I can see is that in order for the way this works in this case is that, first of all, there's trust that has been built towards us, and I say that humbly, but without that trust, you can't facilitate it. If one side says it doesn't work, you can't impose the dialogue. So they know very well that at the end of the day, ultimately, they have the final voice, that I continue to have that trust. So trust is something that as facilitators or as mediators, you have to build continuously. You have to show recognizing and kind of swimming in those waters that, they can get murky at all times. So trust is number one. And I feel that at least until now, and what we have is that we have that trust with both sides. It's also difficult because if one side doesn't like the other side, and if you have the trust of the other one, ultimately you may think it's a zero-sum. Okay, if you're my friend, but you're so-and-so's enemy, if you're also her friend, then what kind of a person are you? So we've explained to them what is the role of a facilitator. They know where are our lines and where are our boundaries, and you have to be both friendly, but at the same time very professional and very, very strict on what you can do, so that not at all times one side will think, okay, but I thought I trusted you and you were my friend, and how come you're talking now? So they know that these are very, very strict lines within. The other thing is that we are very Mediterranean people. And Mediterranean people, at the end of the day, like to get together and talk a lot. So things are relaxed. And sometimes I notice with Peter's facilitation that I have to always kind of remind him that relax, it's okay, they're joking now. It's fine. And there are moments where, and then people are. It's the South, so it's very different. People want to eat and take, and so it's a very different. It's a lighter atmosphere. And for someone from outside, when you look at the conflict, it's so heavy. Were these people really doing this? And now they're eating and talking so you have to be in that context of the Mediterranean. The other thing is that you have to be practical. So if they feel they're intelligent people, so that we're not just here to get them to talk and to get, of course, they need to get to know each other, develop their own discourse, and something that it's nothing the facilitator can plan, but an agenda that they will provide. But that we also have clear practical aims and goals that we've developed together with them. For example, they both agreed that they would like us to work together with them to develop an interreligious council in Cyprus, where so we're working towards a goal where we're still discussing who's going to sit where, who's going to chair, there's a lot of that. So facilitation is still key. Unfortunately, they're not at the space where, and the success will be when we can give our keys and walk out, when they can do it together with no facilitation. The success of this kind of work means that we will not have a job. That's the success. So we should aim not having a job one day, because that means that they can manage to do this together. The other practical thing that they've come to is that they know, both of them have said to each other, and they acknowledge that the principles of human rights that are being violated should not be the case, and that both of them are committed to ensuring that they try to influence the political process to end that. Now the question will be, the Mufti who knows that churches should not be converted to youth centers, or that they should not be left to whatever, or that a bishop should not be forbidden to come and worship, will he be able to have the space and the authority to influence the political players to be able to make that change? But just the fact that he's able to speak out and tell that already takes away a certain guard from one side, because I acknowledge your pain and I don't agree. But we need to be practical. It's not just talk. So I think between trust and practicality, and also the kind of people where they are. And the most important is that they want to talk. And as long as, and they're wanting facilitation. And that's what gives us the possibility then to serve them.
Thank you very much. Is there any final questions or?
You mentioned earlier about Turkish Cypriot community, and then being more secular than the Greek side. But what about the Anatolian Turks? Have they been affected, or has northern Turkey and northern Cyprus been affected by the religious in Turkey?
Yeah, we see that the Anatolian Turks are the ones that are the religious ones. They are the ones that will have. So you can also see a clear division within the Turkish Cypriot or the Turkish community as such. And the babysitting came to rest. I tried. And that is another issue. So there's a long debate going on, because we saw that when the Turkish Cypriots are not identical, they have also said, we want a mufti that also understands what we would like. We don't want the mufti to be the mufti of the Turkish settlers. And we also hear from the Greek side, yes, but we have a lot of commonalities with the Greeks, therefore we find with the Turkish Cypriots, so there is another group of people we can. But when it comes to religion, we have that challenge to overcome as well. And that is something we can only do with the understanding and the help of the Mufti, because he can see that, where things are and what he can do. I mean, the Turkish Cypriots have, traditionally from, Atatürk's time, there's a very strong secularism, and we're trying to tell them that we're not bringing religion back, and that's not the question, but allow religion to coexist. It's not a matter of enforcing you to go to the mosque. No, it's not like that, but recognizing. And when you see, for example, the Social Democrat Party in the Turkish Cypriot society, they are the ones who are sitting in youth centers, which were churches. So there again, if the Social Democratic Party is playing a role, there is something to dialogue with, because they feel, well, there are no Christians on this side, at least the church is not falling apart, and now it's a youth center. What's the problem? It's functional. So, if you're not religious, why not? Let it be. But for somebody else, it's not, that's the same so-and-so's place, and you're there. And there can be a way, while from the Greek Cypriot side, they will say, I'll talk to the Greek Turkish Cypriot, but I won't talk to the Anatolian Turk. But really, if they did, they would be able to find maybe a way forward. So these are uncharted waters. That,
if or when,
yeah.
I don't know if you have to say if or
when
Cyprus gets reunited, what will happen? What will be the fate of the Anatolian Turks?
Well, that's one of the areas that is on the table of negotiation. So there are formulas where they said those, and they're still negotiating, if they will start negotiating, but those that were born, and if one parent is from Turkish Cypriot, so there is formulas, or there is this, we will accept so much, because we're discussing also demography. So everything has to come together, governance. If they will decide on a government with, again, the demographic number will be critical, then that will be that number. So it's a matter of what kind of a solution, they will have to come up with. Will demography be critical? And then how do you deal with those words that until now you've been very strongly saying it's illegal, I don't want. But now, you have to see that there's also a humanitarian aspect with that. So that part of it is very, very linked.
There is a human dimension in this, which is, of course, very, very critical. When we had the youth exchange, 4 of the youth from the Turkish Cypriot side were Anatolian Turks. And we had said from the very beginning that only people who had Cypriot ID could participate in this youth exchange. That is another language to say that only people that can cross. Please select only Turkish Cypriot, no Anatolian Turks, because it will be too complicated. For several reasons this didn't happen, and we ended up with 4 youth who could not pass. And that, of course, initially created enormous stress on the Greek Cypriots, and us, of course, as well, having to handle the problem. But because they are not considered Cypriots, they cannot participate, they are not there. But when the kids meet and they saw that these are also human beings, and they participated in the youth exchange, we had to put more events in the buffer zone to allow for everyone to participate and find ways to deal with it. I mean, a few days later, even the Greek Cypriot leaders came and said, "Can't we smuggle them? Can't we simply smuggle them?" And so immediately, by meeting and seeing that there are because this is of course a group that are victims. Some of them are born in Cyprus. They are not recognized, and they have a very, very strange situation, and they are not able to cross. So by having people to meet and understanding the human dimensions, of course, things change, and that is what is needed.
Thank you very much. Time flies when discussing important issues. And I would like to say thank you very much, and actually to say also that we look forward hearing about this project in the future, in coming seminars, when more time has elapsed and more parts of the project has been a success, like this youth meeting, which is to create a peace network of Cyprus is a great step forward, I would say. In a few years, we'll hear about more of those success stories. Thank you very much. And Peter, he's the president, and I say thank you very much for participating. And I would like to say a special thank you to Salpi, and I would like to give you, instead of a flower, the latest book we have published, Mobilizing the Global Prodigious Left. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Nästa seminarium är klockan 8 ikväll. Då är ni välkomna hit och få Almedalsdricka. Den är alkoholfri och därmed extra god. Vi har ett seminarium tillsammans med UGNTO. Det är en tradition där vi har ett alkoholfritt mingel där vi diskuterar just alkoholfrågan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.